Studying the latter chapters of Isaiah was quite a kind of seminal piece of my first year when I became Bishop of Southern Nottingham. And we found these chapters speaking into our corporate life and beginning to shape who we might be as a diocese. So these are some headlines really from that, and then move on to Jeremiah 29. I'll explain why. But Isaiah 58 is this chapter all about fasting and a critique of the people of God of the day for their approach to fasting. And God comes in through the prophet, and this is Isaiah 58 verse 6. Is not this the fast that I choose, to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and bring the homeless poor into your house, when you see the naked to cover him, and not to hide yourself from your own flesh? Then shall your light break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up. Verse 10, if you pour yourself out for the hungry and satisfy the desire of the afflicted, then shall your light rise in the darkness and your gloom be as the noonday. And then Isaiah 61, which we've already referred to because this is the passage that Jesus picked up and used in the synagogue. All about good news for the poor, binding up the brokenhearted, liberty to the captives, and so on. Jesus closed the scroll up, didn't carry on read, but we keep reading in Isaiah 61, to grant to those who mourn in Zion, to give them a beautiful headdress instead of ashes, oil of gladness instead of mourning, the garment of praise instead of a faint spirit, that they may be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified. They shall build up the ancient ruins. They shall raise up the former devastations. They shall repair the ruined cities, the devastations of many generations. And then in Isaiah 65, verse 17, which of course gets picked up in Revelation. This bit gets picked up in Revelation and the vision of the end of our scriptures. For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things shall not be remembered or come into mind. But be glad and rejoice forever in that which I create. For behold, I create Jerusalem to be a joy, and her people to be a gladness. I will rejoice in Jerusalem and be glad in my people. No more shall be heard in it the sound of weeping and the cry of distress. No more shall there be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not fill out his days. For the young man shall die 100 years old, and the sinner 100 years old shall be accursed. They shall build houses and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and eat their fruit. They shall not build and another inhabit. They shall not plant and another eat. For like the days of a tree shall the days of my people be, and my chosen shall long enjoy the work of their hands. They shall not labour in vain, or bear children for calamity, for they shall be the offspring of the blessed of the Lord, and their descendants with them. Before they call, I will answer. While they are yet speaking, I will hear. The wolf and the lamb shall graze together. The lion shall eat straw like the ox, and dust shall be the serpent's food. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, says the Lord. Isaiah, in these closing chapters, creates this extraordinary vision. In different, if you read the whole lot through, I've just picked bits out of this utterly transformed world and transformed community, which is both extraordinary visionary, but deeply rooted in the reality of living. They will not labour in vain. Work is worthwhile and is meaningful. No more shall there be in it an infant who lives but a few days. Infant mortality eradicated. An old man who does not fill out his days, for the young man shall be die 100 years old. Old age, which is fruitful, fulfilling, valued by the society. These are deeply kind of practical things. And so, yes, we have a vision of new heaven and new earth, and we look and long for that day. But the whole thrust of the kingdom of God is that we are meant to be pulling that future into the present. And be creating at least glimpses of the glory of the kingdom in all its fullness, here and now, in transformed lives and transformed communities. So, what does it? I keep having. What's this going to look like? What is the rest? If we go to back to the Isaiah 61. They shall build up the ancient ruins, they shall raise up the former devastations, they shall repair the ruined cities. What does that mean for devastated communities that were devastated post-mining in our county? What does that mean for devastated industries down the Tees Valley? What does it look like? What might it look like? Because it's not an ethereal thing up there. It is actually, this is saying those communities can be transformed with a new vision and new hope and new reality of godliness in them. And that has to impact our lives. I don't know, those of you who are in work, I don't know what you do. But supposing you work in the chemical industry, what's the vision for a chemical industry that is all about the total well-being of the community? And how does that shape the decisions that you make in management? If you're in local government, what's a vision for infant mortality being dealt with? If you're in the health service, what changes need to happen to tackle some of the infant mortality issues in our own nation, but also internationally? And can we have a vision that says, let's eradicate infant mortality around the world, or at least work out? I passionately believe that's the kind that and where you are placed, where we find ourselves placed, in places of work, we have to keep asking some really big, hard questions of the people around us and the companies and so on, and say, how can this be for the well-being of the whole community? I better not get too much down this line, but I'll do one. See, we are blighted by a culture and a society that is driven by maximising profit. Because if you maximise profit, inevitably you keep cutting employment. And inevitably you cut corners on how you treat the environment, how you treat people and so on. And I'm you can get a variety of these, but either the quadruple bottom line or the quintuple bottom line, depending on which. But that the bottom line is not just about, does this company make a profit? Or does this local authority balance its books? The bottom line has to be about what's social impact, what's the social impact, what's the environmental impact, what's the spiritual impact of this? And are we putting into the spiritual well-being of a community by the decisions we make as a company? Are we putting into the environmental well-being of our land and so on and so forth? And I honestly believe that we as local church and as bigger church have a responsibility to present a better vision for what our communities can be. And to be in the vanguard God of praying for and seeking to work to bring about that better vision for our communities. Which spills out into us doing all kinds of very practical bits of work, like offering to cut people's grass. Because it gets down to that kind of level. But we need the big vision first, and so on. So, if we go to Jeremiah 29, because having lived long in Isaiah while I was in southern Nottingham, I find myself now living in Jeremiah. And for a variety of reasons, this happens in our lives, doesn't it? That a particular passage or bit or bits suddenly keep coming our way. So here's another bit of the story to illustrate it. When we were in Preston-on-Tees, I was sat in the congregation on a Sunday evening. This didn't happen very often, but from time to time I did make sure that I was rotated to be doing nothing, so I could sit in the congregation to remind myself of what it felt like. And I still deliberately do it, because it all started when the children were very small. We went on holiday and in Wales, and we went to church on Sunday, and it was so bad. It was so bad. And as we walked out, I said to my children, if I ever do that to you, please tell me. Right? Because Rosemary just had to apologise to our children for the appalling impression of church they've been given that Sunday.
Was it an English preacher?
It was an English preacher. And it wasn't a Church of Wales, it was a free church, actually. So, it was, anyway. So I think it's important that sometimes we just sit and remind ourselves what it is. So I was sat and my eldest, Caroline, was reading the Old Testament lesson. And it was a story from Numbers about the people of God in the wilderness, and it's the passage in Numbers where it describes exactly about when the cloud lifted, they moved. And when the cloud stopped, they stayed. And that sometimes it was for a day, and sometimes for a long period, and so on. And it's all when the cloud moved. And I was sat there, and it just bang in the middle of my chest. When the cloud moves. And that was that phrase. When the cloud moves. And when the cloud moves, you have to go. And I thought, I had too much cheese to eat. But I noticed, and in fact, so much so, when I got home, I shared with Rosemary, and I put on my screensaver on the computer, when the cloud moves. In the next 2 weeks, it felt like every day, it wasn't quite, but in completely different context, without having said anything to anybody, that passage came up, and I was beginning to think, hang on, what's going on? And 2 weeks later, I got the letter saying, would you consider becoming Bishop of Southampton? And Rosemary said, the cloud just lifted, didn't it? That's after we'd cried for it. Anyway, so, and then we had, because we didn't want to leave. We were too far, loving what we were doing. Well, Jeremiah 29 has been a bit like that in the last few months. Okay. And it's a passage that I've loved for years and so on. But Jeremiah's vision, remember, Jeremiah 29 is the letter that Jeremiah writes to the Jews who have been taken into exile in Babylon. So everything's gone. The temple's gone, the king's gone, the nation's gone, they're in exile, they're in captivity. What's going on? And there are voices saying, God's going to rescue us very quick. Jeremiah has been warning them for years that if they don't listen, exile is coming. And he writes the letter to the elders in exile. And this is verse 4. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon, build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat their produce. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there, do not decrease. But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. For thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, do not let your prophets and your diviners who are among you deceive you, and do not listen to the dreams that they dream, for it's a lie that they're prophesying to you in my name. I didn't send them, declares the Lord. For thus says the Lord, when 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will visit you, and I will fulfill to you my promise and bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for wholeness and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will hear you. You will seek me and find me. When you seek me with all your heart, I will be found by you. Build houses and live in them. Be at home in the community. Be part of the Babylonian community. Because the thrust of, if you think, when the voice is saying you're going to be back in Jerusalem before you know it, you don't settle down, you don't get stuck into the community. But Jeremiah, the word of the Lord through Jeremiah is, get stuck into this community. Have houses, live in them, plant gardens, eat their produce. That means you're committed to staying. You're committed to being around for quite a long time. And be productive, fruitful, contribute to the well-being of this city. Seek the welfare of the city, which meant that they were to engage in business and commerce. They were to engage in community life. They were to become the people that were the blessing for the people around them in Babylon. And they were to pray for it. Instead of praying against it, or praying to be released from it, they were to pray for it. And of course you see it worked out in things like the story of Daniel and what that meant for Daniel and his friends, who found themselves in very high office. But they were living out what Jeremiah had said, being part and parcel of the community, seeking its welfare, praying for it. And this is no short-term thing, is it? For thus says the Lord, when 70 years are completed. Now I find that slightly scary, because this is no short-term miracle of release. It's a long haul of life. Actually, you're not going to see the real fulfillment of all of the promises. Your children even might not see them. It's your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren who are really going to see the fulfillment of being back in Israel and a release from Babylon and so on. It's a long haul that you've got to get used to, exiles. That was the vision Jeremiah gave. And I just find myself living with some of this. And what does it mean for us? Because Peter, in Peter's letter, he describes Christians as aliens and exiles living in the world. So we have a vision of a new heaven and a new earth, but we're to live as aliens and exiles. So sometimes we interpret that as about our distinctiveness of how we live, and absolutely that's there in Peter. But if you take the language very carefully and think what it would mean to those first century Jewish Christians to whom he was writing, they would also think entirely about what did it mean to live as an exile in Babylon? Well, it meant we got stuck into the community in which we were placed. to work to seek its welfare, to pray for it, to bless it, to be part and parcel of it. So, that leads me to kind of ask these questions for you. What, in looking for your next phase of vision, might it have something to do with deepening the part you play in the life of this community and area? And that may you're obviously already doing that with the whole every household thing and some of the stuff. But what deepening of vision, of engagement with the community in which you're set, what might that look like? And particularly in terms of thinking about who are the neediest and the poorest within your own community. It was interesting you were sharing about home for people with learning difficulties. One of the things that I've learned from Bishop Emmanuel and from my regular visits to Rwanda is when I very first went there, which was in 1987, 3 years after the genocide, a completely devastated land. And in subsequent years, I found that when you're going to one of the poorest nations on earth, what does the gospel that has a priority for the poor look like for the Christians there? How do they interpret the gospel for the poor? Well, they taught me that in every society there are the most needy and the most vulnerable. So even when you're living with massive poverty, you will find others who are in even greater need than the majority. So in Rwanda, this has worked out in two ways. One is that the Batwa, who because most of you looking at your age will think of as the pygmies. You're not allowed to call them pygmies now, but the Batwa, who are 1% of the population of Rwanda. And they are the forgotten people. They are the put down people. So the church has said, we will give some priority to working with the Batwa, because no one else is interested in them. They really are the forgotten people. And in spite of all the devastation that they had been through war and genocide, they had a refugee camp emerge on the hill outside Byumba town with 10,000 Congolese refugees because of the fighting in Congo. So what did the local church do? It went into the refugee camp and provided food for the refugees on a regular basis. The UN were doing stuff as well, but for a period of time, every fourth week, the entire collection was given over to buying food and then people going in and cooking food for the refugees, because they were in an even worse state as far as the concern. So who are the poor? Who are the forgotten? And how do you serve them? But actually, how do you just engage by having houses, living in them, and so on? I'm very proud of my eldest daughter. Well, I'm actually very proud of all four of my children. I'm very much proud of my eldest daughter because she lives in the East End of London on a very tough estate. And is part of an Eden Project team. And she and her flatmate have decided to buy a property on this tough estate. And a bit Jeremiah-like. Jeremiah bought a field as a sign and symbol of their commitment to the community, to this poor community. And to say to the community, we're not about coming and going, we're about being here, living with you, amongst you, living with all the things that you do. And there's a group of them that have done that. So what might that look? I can't give you the answer to what I'm just saying. I think that's one of the questions I think you need to ask yourselves about what next. And that might also play out in the question: what might your might the vision be for what part do you play in the wider area, not just how you serve your parish? Given that you are one of the wealthier churches, I'm not talking economic, in terms of numbers, in terms of gifting and so on in the area, what might the Lord be saying to you about gifting some of that into serving the wider community? Some of you might be in positions of influence in business, in local authority and so on. How might that work out? But as a corporately, how do you help people serve the wider area and the wider world? And I think those are the kind of really key questions I want to ask you to explore a bit. At which point I think actually it's time for me to stop and let you do that, unless you want to ask any questions or make comments. Otherwise we'll send you into groups for about 20 minutes or so and then have a bit of feedback before one. Would that make sense, John? Yeah? Does anyone want just to ask any questions of clarification or make any comment? No? All right. Don't go to the questions on the screen because I've kind of asked slightly different questions from the ones that are because we've gone slightly. So it's just think around these things around from Isaiah and Jeremiah and how might they work out for you serving this community and perhaps the wider area. Is that clear? I don't know how you're